Disputation 9, Technocracy, Democracy, and Liberalism. Rule by experts, rule by people versus individual freedom. So Plato, gentlemen, seems to argue for rule by experts, to put it very simply. He states that ruling is a craft and the crew has no business overruling the navigator. Jefferson argues for rule by the people if they're educated, holding power in their hands, and if they choose their own rulers. Plato says that ends in tyranny. So our final question for both of you is, which is better, rule by experts or rule by people? And is individual freedom worth more than either?
Okay, so I get to go first now. Is this right? Okay, I'm not violating our norm. Yeah, so Socrates definitely suggests that rule by a few experts, I guess you could call them, is better than rule by a lot of non-experts. With the difference being that we shouldn't think of kind of masterful bureaucrat or technologist or whatever as the person we have in mind. At least in so far as the Republic is concerned, it's the person of really outstanding virtue and wisdom. But that's a little bit different, I think, than saying an expert or a technocrat or what have you. The One thing that I'm struck by in reading the Jefferson readings that you arranged for this session is how similar in some respects Jefferson seems to be to some fundamental insights that Socrates presents. I mean, the idea that, for instance, that there is a natural aristocracy, that a regime is good insofar as it can highlight natural aristocrats and, let's say, demote the pseudo aristocrats. This is a basic kind of Platonic insight, I think, as well as a Jeffersonian insight. I think they would primarily differ, I'd say, in the kind of institutions and mechanisms that they trust to get the natural aristocrats in positions of authority. It seems to me, but I'll defer in all things Jefferson and many other things to my colleague, Dr. McDonald, that Jefferson has a lot of trust in elections to do that. Plato considers elections an aristocratic institution too, actually, not so much in the Republic, but in other dialogue, the laws. He says that they're certainly more aristocratic than rule by lottery, which is, the primary way that Athens selects its officials. So elections are kind of aristocratic, but he doesn't seem to trust elections only, right, to preserve, to kind of recognize natural talent, cultivate it, and put it in a position where it can be authoritative. To the extent he points us to any institutions, it seems to be, private education, the kinds of encounters that individuals have with Socrates. Plato founds an institution, an academic institution called the Academy. We don't have the founding charter, but I like to think of it as being a kind of auxiliary to the city that is supposed to at least increase the probability that, natural aristocrats will be in a position of some kind of authority in the city. So, maybe the mechanisms are different, but the goal is strikingly, I would say, similar between these two people when they think about how, experts or outstandingly virtuous people should rule. Over to you, Dr. McDonald.
Yeah, so I mean, I agree with the way the question is framed, and I think that Jefferson didn't believe that we should be ruled by experts. I think Jefferson fundamentally believed that free people ruled themselves as individuals, and one of the great challenges of government throughout American history, but certainly Jefferson found it to be one of the great challenges of government in the 1790s, and even during his own presidency, was keeping a check on government and making sure that it didn't take on powers that weren't delegated to it through the Constitution, so that there would be plenty of room for people to make their own decisions about the vast majority of the questions in their life. And when it comes down to your preferences, you are the expert, right? I mean, you know how you balance different questions about what you want to do with your day, how you value your time. Do I want to mow the lawn or do I want to go to Five Guys? I mean, I want to do both, but what do? I need to mow the lawn, so I'm going to do that. That's probably not the best example, but I think you all get what I'm saying. I mean, Jefferson wanted to provide maximum space for individual Americans to have freedom over, their own decisions. But, he wasn't an anarchist. We were going to have a government. We needed leadership at various levels, and, people in positions of authority did have to make decisions. I'll say that Jefferson throughout his life cultivated relationships with a lot of experts and a lot of different things. And I think one of the good things about Thomas Jefferson is he was humble enough to always reach out to people who he thought, had particular expertise and seek their advice. Washington was famous for doing that as well. So, I think leaders who are humble, I mean, that's a rare quality, but, office holders who are humble and are able to seek advice from people who know what they're talking about is a very good thing. But to have this sort of technocracy, this progressive Wilsonian city manager type government, I shouldn't have said that because some of you don't know what I'm talking about, but a big push of the progressive era was the creation of all sorts of, professional schools of government and the idea of civil service and essentially, creating what became bureaucracies, where some people will say we have a fourth branch of government. I think Jefferson would be really hostile to that idea. And I think that's why Woodrow Wilson was so hostile to the ideas of Thomas Jefferson. He understood that just wasn't the thrust of the American founding, that the American founding was endeavoring to sort of maximize the degree to which individuals could make their own decisions about their own lives.